Fun song. Love Deus Ex. Hope everybody's having a good day. Hoping to make it better. Welcome, 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 my friends. It's Monday! Monday fun day. I don't know what Monday means, other than the fact that we're gonna be chilling and talking and relaxing and looking at development stuff. Today is a news day. Actually, no, today is not a news day. We actually just kind of look at development stuff. Wednesdays are news days. Mondays are where we talk about the weird stuff, the complicated stuff, the cool stuff. And today is persistent entity streaming, or at least what little bit of it I can understand. I'm gonna start this out by saying I don't actually know this stuff as a trade. I'm just regurgitating what I already hear and trying to make sense of it. So I might be wrong on some stuff, might not be super accurate on some stuff, but I'm gonna do my best and just share what I've seen and learned over the time. And hopefully it will help some other people understand what this game is, how it's going to work, and some of the cool little intricacies of how it does work. But before we get started, hello, my friends. EPG, the Deefies. Y'all were in here early today. The Eventine, I saw you were Vixie calling out the Deus Ex. I'm glad somebody calls it out. Jake, welcome, welcome, Okinawa. Lily Faye, thanks. And welcome to coming to the live stream. Excellent, good to see you, good to see you. Thank you. Wyvern, hyped for that UI. I'm glad that they've made some progress on the UI engine. Thank God. I'm really looking forward to seeing some more of that development soon. Love some water. Didn't somebody just give me like a hydration reminder? Yeah, y'all, Punji, of course. Spamming the hydration, because a tomato can't go without hydration. Welcome in, everybody. In France, it's 4 p.m. Yeah, you're like an hour. You're only an hour behind me. Nice. Wow. You're really far for only being an hour behind. While we wait, which ship does everyone think will be memed for this year for the best in show? It's going to be the PTV. It might be a meme for some people, but people really want the PTV out there. What up, Toes Gang? Null Razor, good to see you. Davis, hello. Calamitous Intent. Y'all with the tongue twister names. Gebio Plays, hello, welcome, and thank you for following the stream. 07s to you. Sit Nerp, how you doing? Hello. Whoever understands PES entirely is speaking the language of gods. Yeah. Honestly, I wish I could have somebody right here next to me who understands it 100%. The best I can do is a couple of recordings of videos that I took where the devs are speaking nonsense, to be honest, from my primitive perspective. Romidus, thanks for the sub. Subbing up on Twitch with that Amazon Prime sub. I appreciate this. I appreciate the support. I'd like to, before we get started here, mention that the 400i giveaway is ending towards the end of this stream. I will be pulling the winner right after this stream and making an announcement tomorrow on who won that. So if we do meet our goals this stream, I will still drop one more of those exclusive codes for extra entries into the giveaway, but that 400i giveaway is going, so feel free to jump into that with the exclamation point giveaway command. And there's also still a giveaway going on for the mug. That is live, and I will be pulling that live on the stream today. We're going to give away a custom Space Tomato mug from your mouth to my toes. Or that doesn't make sense. To my mouth to my toes. From my mouth to... It's a joke about tomatoes. You can't say from your head because you're not putting the mug into your head. Whatever. You guys get the idea. We have a giveaway for a mug. And I promise it's much more normal than my little tagline there. Oh boy, we got a lot of commands for giveaway. So what I'm gonna do is I'll just copy the link and drop it into the chat for everybody because y'all are gonna kill my bots. Come on. Wow, chat. Relax, chat. Twitch! Oh my god, I really don't like Twitch sometimes. There we go. Alright, here you go. Dropping the links into either chat so you don't have to keep spamming the command. Just hit that link. That's all you need. Okay, where are we? What's going on? More hydration. Cool. I feel you. Let's go ahead and get started. How's everybody's weekend though? Like, good things going on? The new motto for this channel should be from my mouth to my toes. From my mouth to your toes. That just doesn't make sense. Some kind of foot fetish thing. Okay, so today, persistent entity streaming. This is the most important feature coming out this year in Star Citizen, without a doubt. This is one of the most important features for the game to have gotten, period. And it is the biggest blocker for getting server meshing working. So, such an important thing. It gets talked about all the time. It's referenced a lot. It might be coming to us in 3.18. It has to be coming to us in 3.18, let's be honest. So, I figured let's try and shed some light on the feature, what the heck it's supposed to do for the game, and where the heck it came from. Because for the majority of people, it only just started to be a thing this year, but we've been seeing work on this for years now through things like the iCache work, the Super P-Cache work, and other little things. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into this amazing little graph made by Unobtainium, the OG, and we're going to take a look at this old spot here, this orange one, persistent entity streaming. This is the current the current milestone that we're at in our ever growing journey to reach server meshing. So before we hit server meshing, persistent entity streaming is needed, and that is kind of the big focus for this year. So let's jump in and take a look first at what actually is the definition of persistent entity streaming, and then I will introduce you to iCache, which was the predecessor to entity streaming, and then we're going to go through all of these tabs and look at the different resources I collected to talk a little bit about what this is going to mean for us. Should be fun. Let's dive in. So iCache is getting replaced. Yes, iCache was replaced. And I will explain how that ended up happening here today. Jumping in, persistent entity streaming. Now, remember, this is unofficial information, but it has been, gotten collected from different areas. So everything should be taken with a grain of salt, but in general, this is basically direct from CIG. So the challenges that bring up the need for persistent entity streaming are that with all items physically present and stored in the game world with physicalized damage and degradation, with thousands of NPCs going about their lives, with thousands of dynamic missions and events generated by AI and players, with a fully simulated economy, all in a single server mesh, all of the game world needs to be persisted into a database that can be accessed by the game servers in real time, requiring an architecture that is able to handle high amounts of data. So basically they're like, yo, the persistent universe is a computer and we kind of need a hard drive. So PES is for lack of a better term, because my head is not filled with that many terms, PES is kind of like a hard drive of the overarching space that is Star Citizen. So the goal is to have a persistent world where everything is stored in this database and loaded by the game servers when they need it, and accessed and computed by various services. That's where the streaming name comes in. Persistent entity streaming, loading in stuff into the server. The other goal is to allow for all items to be placed anywhere in the game world and persist over large amounts of time. So that's probably that's the coolest part, in my opinion. I think that's the most noticeable part. You crash a ship on a planet, your ship stays there, somebody else can come and salvage it at some point. You get blown up in the atmosphere of, there's actually this really, really good video. I don't know if I have it saved. Bear with me for a second, as you all are so patient to do, because I constantly have to do this. Where is the video? I think it's this one. This video is dope. If you haven't seen it, well, I'm about to show you. All right, so CIG is really good at hype. Like, they're really good at hype. This was a trailer that was released for Star Citizen 3.0, which was like the first time we ever had moons. And obviously everybody was imagining stuff like this, but like that stuff wasn't possible. That freaking, we're what, 4 years on and that stuff's still not exactly possible. But that's the kind of idea that I think comes with persistent entity streaming. You blow up a ship, their cargo literally falls down to the planet under atmosphere, and it doesn't just disappear. somebody can go down if it hasn't taken enough damage and find that cargo in that wreckage because it persists. So once you start to look at the way that we play the game and all the stuff that's kind of missing, you can start to fill in gaps with the persistent entity streaming and realize that like this could really open up the possibilities a lot. Wish we could see that kind of explosive action when we die. Yeah, I would love for some like gradual explosions and destructions of the ship like that. Not gonna lie, you were hoping Chris was gonna climb out of the box. Oh gosh. Lord Skippy, thank you for the toes membership. That's just, I need to stop throwing toes before things. Thank you for the membership. I see you with the toes emotes. 8 months on here at YouTube. That's since we started streaming on YouTube. Thank you for that, man. I appreciate it. You've never seen that footage? So dope. If anybody wants to watch the rest of that trailer, it is the Star Citizen 3.0 feature trailer. Okay, so we looked at an example of the persistent entity streaming. Let's talk quickly here about the approaches, and then I'm going to introduce you to iCache, which was what this was originally meant to be. So, an approach: introduce a highly scalable cloud-native service backend architecture for high data throughput, low latency, high responsiveness, fault tolerance, and crash recovery. Introduce a horizontally scalable graph database known as the entity graph and a cache known as the replication layer to store the state of the game world. Both of those terms are going to come up again. We're going to get real familiar with that stuff. Simulate the economy in a high-level abstraction environment to create a realistic action-reaction system. Its effects will be reflected in the game world by the game servers. That feels a little more quantum related, but let's keep going because I see it popping up in the next one. Have logic on the game servers and hybrid service which access database like global database, entity graph, reputation database, probability and mission data generated by the quantum economy simulator, and then use all of this data to create their section of the game world with. Basically, pull information from all the services of the game and then spawn the correct thing into the game based on those services. Hey, there's a high probability of pirates being here. Put a pirate ship into there that can persist. Yeah, I'm not gonna... I almost just went down a rabbit hole there. Using gRPC or remote procedure calls for communication between services. I don't know what that means. This only comes fully online when hybrid replication layer service goes live. So that is a part of server meshing and something that they already seem to have working in the internally. In fact, this whole thing is orange because persistent entity streaming is, as you can see up here in the legend, functioning internally. Now, we were supposed to see it by now, and we'll look at the chairman's letter that we got earlier this year and look at the words that they use there, because if you do look at that, they are behind schedule. No surprise there, but it is kind of crappy to see. They are behind schedule right now on getting this out to the public in any form, Evocati, PTU, whatever it might be. So that's persistent entity streaming. That's at least a basic version of it. Again, like I said, this whole thing is going to be just explaining what this is and what it's going to do for the game. But before we jump into that, let's look at the iCache, which was originally what the persistent entity streaming was. Where is this information? I can drop a link for you. There you go. Randomly passed Chris Roberts and Sandy in the street last weekend. Wow. Out in, what, Manchester they're at? There are quite a lot of things in the approach section which are wrong. Not that it matters or makes much of a difference to most people. That's fair. A lot of the stuff felt a little bit misplaced, but overall, I think most of the details, I think it's the challenges and goals that are most important here for sure. It's always 2 weeks away. 2 weeks! Oh my God, imagine if it was always 2 weeks away. I'd be dying. There are quite a lot of... Oh, I already read that. A data-driven persistent universe? That's the idea. Persist those hospital gowns. Yes! We are the kingdom of hospital gowns. Okay, so... entity graph / iCache. This is our introduction to iCache. I'll go deeper into it right after this. So basically the goals here are to build a new horizontally scalable shardable database that can persist all entities in the game world and serve all game servers in a performant and thus responsive way. Sounds pretty similar, right, to persistent entity streaming. The big difference from what I can understand between iCache and the persistent entity streaming is the scale. iCache being something that was meant for a server or a persistent environment, whereas the persistent entity streaming or the global entity graph that it became, or I'm sorry, the global entity graph that is kind of synonymous with it is meant to be able to be used across different shards, across the whole world, in any region whatsoever. I've got a good, I've got a metaphor for this. I promise it's going to be very metaphorical. Okay, so that's persistent entity streaming and the entity graph, the item cache. But I'm not very good at explaining it. As you can see, I'm mostly good at reading and interpreting. So let's look at what the actual developers were saying about iCache back in 2020. So this is a post on the forum where somebody was asking about what's going on with iCache, where is it, how is it going to work? And keep in mind, iCache was the successor to the Pcache. Pcache being the, I can't remember what P stood for. Poison cache, I don't know. So what we're going to hear now is what the new iCache was supposed to be back in 2020. You wonder if they'll add reputation to objects. You mean if an object gets stolen from a player, then stolen back, then pirated from the person, then pirated again, could that object become more famous and worth more? Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. RPC is short for remote process communication and is the general computer science name for call a function from one service on another service, usually on a remote server. Kind of a partner to IPC. Huh. Okay. As far as you understood, iCache didn't work out at all. Their database structure turned out to be too slow. The entity graph is a completely new design to replace iCache. That sounds a little more like it. Potato cache. I like that one. Jared hinted that they hired new network engineers and found a better way to do stuff. They did. In fact, one of those engineers who was hired specifically for the new version of server meshing hops into our chat every once in a while. Was here last time we were going over this. Might end up showing up today. But sometimes he'll throw out an answer or two on what's going on. But yeah, he's got his fingers in the pie. It's very exciting. Okay. So the question was, it's been a very long time since we had an update on the physical inventory in iCache. Can CIG please give more insight? And Chad McKinney, who is a CIG developer, came on and said, iCache, global persistence, and the physical inventory are several very large features being worked on from multiple angles by multiple teams. It is one of our highest priorities as a company and is actively being worked on. At this point, I think iCache / global persistence tier 1 will land before the end of the year, but I don't want to specify exact dates. One thing to mention is that long-term persistence did take some resources away from iCache work, but we decided that it was worth it since the quality of life improvements to players would be a benefit. Physical inventory heavily relies on iCache and global persistence, and our entire system was designed around it. For that reason, physical inventory will naturally come after that work is completed, though we're trying to find ways to get work started on it in parallel where possible. So, most of you know we did not get physical inventory in 2020. Did they call it physical inventory? I actually should probably confirm that. I believe that they called 315's inventory edition physical inventory, right? And I'm not misnaming something. Let's see. Give me the answer. Yeah. So physical local inventory support. And this was what he was saying was meant to use the iCache system. So Pwaz then comes in and asks, what exactly is the difference between iCache, global persistence, and physical inventory? I read in an old monthly report, it was called the Pcache. What's the difference between Pcache and iCache? So now we get kind of more information. Persistence cache, it's the Pcache, is the legacy system, using a monolithic cache for queries to the persistent item database. As you can imagine, this does not scale well, and worse, when it goes down, the game becomes essentially unplayable for everyone. The new iCache uses a proliferated fleet of services to optimize querying in a scalable fashion, while using best practices for fault tolerance and recovery. So for example, while using best practices for fault tolerance and recovery. So for example, all nodes have their data replicated in the network. So even if one goes down, only partial data response is briefly lost, and quickly a new one is rebuilt in its place. So automatic regeneration. Same idea as the persistent entity streaming. However, that one uses the replication layer in order to disconnect that sort of cache from the clients or simulation and keep the item graph database or entity graph all the way up here, separated from everything else. And we'll get to that again in the future. I'm just jumping ahead a little bit. Global persistence is the term some of you may have noticed me bringing up in some of my comments, and that's because it is a related but different feature set that also needs to be implemented. Just because you have a database and cool querying system for that data doesn't mean the game somehow automatically uses it in all the game systems. Nor does it make servers or shards have persistent state. It just gives you a tool to use to enable that. In order to get server history persisted for everything, you need to do a lot of work in server code to persist out and load back in said state. This is global persistence. This is what persistent entity streaming will solve, allowing for all of those things to always persist, even if it's not in the same shard or server. I bring it up all the time because it touches so much. For example, physical inventory. Inventories are just containers of items, but they are physicalized because they themselves are persistent entities with state. This means you can have a backpack with weapons or other items in it and have a way to stow and unstow them from that inventory. But also that inventory can be instanced in the world and left in a vehicle or dropped off on top of a mountain on a moon for another player to pick up. So physical inventory relies on global persistence, which relies on iCache. But there are other features that rely on global persistence as well. For example, now we can explore gameplay that can permanently or long-term scales modify locations in the game. For example, space station damage. Ooh, Port Olisar could suffer an attack on a shard and it would be damaged for some time until repairs could take place. This would persist even if the server or shard went down, as it is no longer just in memory state. There's a ton more, such as full server recovery after a server crash. People often complain about losing cargo after a server crash, as we can't get players back into their ships right now after a server crash, unlike a client crash, which we lose the state of the server. With global persistence, this will be recorded in the shard record it was associated with. So quickly, we spin up another instance, it recovers the shard record, then we can use matchmaking to get players back into the shard they just lost connection to. This kind of already happens. They started that 30k heartbeat thing, and so far, it's been pretty effective. You're still unclear on how entities will despawn. We'll get around to that. Actually, I think that's pretty unclear, to say the least. It depends on if the entity is stowed or unstowed. So now, let me think. Did I introduce? I want to make sure I introduced everything, but I want to do my metaphor. And we're going to use some paint for this. Yeah. All right. So let me just make sure I've got everything figured out. Okay. So you have your entity graph, right? I'm really bad at drawing with a mouse. Sue me. You have your servers, server. Oh God, that's a bad R. You have your shard. So here's how this works. Oh, and then you have the persistent universe, the PU. PU. Okay, so let's say that we had a convention center. This massive box. This is the San Diego Convention Center, right? Inside of this convention center, we have rooms. We got one room here. We've got one room here. We've got a room over here. It's a little bit longer. This is the long room. And then we have a fourth room here. Now, these are your shards. Shards are red. All right. So overall, yeah, I should have color coded this better. So overall, you have the PU out here, which is made up of 4 different shards. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, outside of these shards, completely disconnected from these shards, you have a conveyor belt. This conveyor belt that runs down the middle of all of these shards. It's going to be just this ugly long line. This conveyor belt makes all of the items continue to roll through every shard. So each conveyor belt has a little path that comes into the room and dips back out, right? So your items can ride these paths into each shard. Conveyor belt and conveyor belt. This is so bad. Okay, so then on top of that, you have your servers, like I said. Servers are blue. Let's say inside of this convention center, your servers are tables. Table, 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 table. Table, 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 table. I got this strategy from Devin Nash, if anybody watches his stuff. Table, 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 table. Okay, so convention center is the persistent universe. The specific rooms in the convention center are shards. The blue circles, or the tables, are your servers, yes? So you have players who are, what should a player be? Let's make the players green. So you have players who are walking around inside of these shards, da 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 da. And okay, actually no, they're not walking around. Sorry, they are sitting at the tables. Players are sitting at tables because that's the server that they're assigned to. Oh my God, this takes over. Blah blah blah. Green, 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 green. So the green are the players. Player. And they sit at the servers. The servers are supporting the players in all the stuff that they have. If you are on a server, you're good to go. And you can take your items off the conveyor belt into that server. That's what the server is there for. It's meant to load in those things into the shard that you're on. That conveyor belt can go to any shard. So as long as you put your stuff onto this conveyor belt and leave your shard, let's say you're playing in the North American shard, you log off of there, log back on the Australian shard. If you did store your stuff back into the persistent entity or the entity graph, which is this conveyor belt, it will show up in the other shard. You can always get your stuff back if you've stored it somewhere. If you haven't, if you left it on the server, if you left it out somewhere, then you can't get it back on another shard. You have to return to that shard to get it because it didn't get on that conveyor belt. It was not in the entity graph. It was just left out in the place that you're in. So if you have a bunch of stuff in a backpack and you leave that backpack on a mountain, yes, it will persist there in that shard. But if you went to, say, the Australia region shard, it won't be there. However, if you had the backpack and you stored it into the space station, it would be on that other shard. because you put it back into that entity graph. You put it back in a place where the game could store it and pass it along to other shards. So the idea behind my crazy drawing here is that you can either stow your entities or you can unstow your entities. This is actually something that is referenced here. Stow and unstow. With physicalized items and inventories making its way into the game, there needs to be a way to reliably persist and access such information between game instances and shards. So you have to stow something for your entity to be sent to another shard. I promise it'll make much more sense when they explain it. I'm just trying to get you guys like into the mindset. But as long as you're stowing stuff into a space station, into some kind of an inventory, you'll be able to transfer between shards. This is important because we don't know how many shards there are going to be. Yes, they would like to do one big persistent single shard, as they say here, but it's not likely. And I'm pretty sure people have said that they've already said they're not going to do it. Hey, Sketch, did that make sense to anybody? Do shards actually represent physical spaces in the PU? No, they don't. One shard represents the entire persistent universe. They're just copies. Every shard is a copy of the same persistent universe. What has Australia got to do with this? I'm attacking Australia. Not that bad of a diagram. I'd be happy if resources I work with took the time to do that for their respective areas. Hey, I just wanted to play with paint, to be honest. I've actually never done anything in paint. This is my first time, so hey. There's also something called hero items, stow and unstow. Ooh, okay, so that could be different with hero items. Makes sense, yes. Vegerex, no. Where did I lose ya? Don't we already have that? Have what, Jake? You got here halfway. There was no way you were gonna get it. Was that a drawing of how to make Swiss cheese sandwich? It's a grilled cheese, actually, but close. The idea was, your man has to be the physics teacher's son and best student. The idea is basically that, I mean, they actually lay it out graphically right here. Everything that I just showed you is laid out right here. This is the exact same thing. All of those tables I mentioned that were servers, that's what these purple squares are. That, what's it called? The conveyor belt that goes around to each of your shards, this orange thing, is the orange block up here. That's your conveyor belt. That's what stores everything. The clients down here are the green things. Those are the players. The idea is that this replication layer will always transmit everything between all of the components, but you have to make sure that what you want transmitted is stored if you are going to a different shard. And we'll start talking about shards because that sounds a lot worse than it is. That sounds like it's not actually a living universe, but I think it's going to be pretty reliable depending on how big they can make the geographic areas for the shards. And when I say the geographic areas, I mean in real life, like North America, Europe, the Pacific, that kind of thing. All right. So this was May 18th, 2020. Chad McKinney was talking about these resources. Now we actually were able to get him on camera a few months later to talk again about persistent entity streaming and I believe iCache. So this is going to be him talking about this in person rather than on text. And we're kind of jumping back to the more simplistic situation here. So forget the shards and the server meshing. We'll get back to that. For now, back to iCache and persistence and what they offer.
A shorthand for a collection of services that iCache is effectively kind of shorthand for a collection of services that are interfacing with the game servers and backend databases to allow us to both write out and query data efficiently and in a fault-tolerant way. So this is really important because right now, the way the servers are working, they're using an in-memory kind of database for for this global data. Ultimately, that's not feasible. If we need to build it out so that things can work in a mesh. In order for that to happen, we need to actually write this out into a place that all the servers can look at it and agree on what the state of the world is. So the iCache is our solution to make that access scalable. Mm-hmm. And right now, the iCache infrastructure on the back end is actually largely done, and it's now at the point where game side, we're hooking up our game code in order to correctly write out the data efficiently, query the data efficiently, as well as fix up some of the game code systems that had previously maybe had some assumptions that don't work correctly within the new context. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. Effectively, what we're trying to do is cache certain data that we know that we need. And this prevents us from hitting the database, which is a more expensive access. So by caching it, we're optimizing our access. Mm-hmm. And we're also able to build in a certain amount of fault tolerance in this system through various techniques like duplication and regeneration. So this gives us fast access for the information that we need when we need it. And then at the same time, on the game side, okay, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I get that. This stuff is so freaking thick. But he's basically saying what persistent entity streaming is, but like it didn't work. iCache wasn't the answer because it wasn't scalable. It wasn't fast enough. He's talking about how it makes it more efficient for them to be able to call these things out of the database and into the game, but as we've seen just this last year, it wasn't fast enough to do that. So they kind of had to go back to the drawing board and work on some more. But we actually aren't at that point yet. They continued to talk about this throughout 2020. So we'll keep reading into some more things. And it's not until around here, I think it is, that we start to realize things have changed. This is a monthly report from the beginning of 2021. So we'll get to that point, but let's hear what else Chad has to say.
So yeah, it's effectively like you mentioned, like the difference between having a hard disk where the data is stored for long-term storage, that's like more permanent, and your RAM that it kind of effectively gives you faster access that you're happier to write to, but you know that it's temporary. So the iCache storage is storage that's not meant to actually capture and define the state of the world, but rather is an intermediary between the final state of the world, which is the actual database. So that's a good analogy.
It's interesting. So if he's calling iCache the connection to the database, it almost sounds like the iCache is synonymous with the replication layer. But it's hard to know. I do hope that dev shows up in chat so he can correct me on some of this stuff. They had to make an entire new architecture at the end of 2020. Yeah, it was like throughout 2021. Because they start mentioning the super P cache, and then they never really clarify what that is, and then suddenly there's the entity graph. When was this made? This was mid-2020, so this was before they switched over. Okay, so that was an August 2020 example of how they were approaching persistent entity streaming back then. During the pandemic, when it first started, when everything was crazy, they were still talking iCache. Now we jump forward from here to October of that same year, October of 2020, where we get an update on iCache and what's going on with it. And I read iCache, which will allow us to record state on any dynamic arbitrary item in the universe. So you could touch down on a planet, drop a freaking... I'm so tired of this coffee cup example. So you could touch down on a planet, drop a coffee cup in a forest on some remote planet, leave and come back a month later to still see the coffee mug where you left it. iCache opens up true universe persistence for Star Citizen and enables what we are calling physical inventory, where you no longer will have a magic bag of holding. You will be limited to the items you can physically carry or equip, or that you can store on your ship or HAB. With physical inventory, item and resource management become much more important. What you take with you on your ship is important. Traveling to a hostile environment, yada, 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 We have made great progress on iCache and are hoping to have it in a live build by Q2 of next year. So they were talking about June, July-ish of 2021. Now, I know we keep talking about how iCache kind of led into persistent entity streaming, but I think it's still good to note here that very clearly something did happen that wasn't persistent entity streaming that allowed for physical inventory. So going back here, looking at it as its own thing and not as something that was replaced by persistent entity streaming, I like that more because it does feel like the iCache helped them do something, or at least the work they were doing on iCache helped them with physical inventory. Furthermore, server meshing is another big technical milestone ahead of us. It's dependent on iCache, as that allows the various servers in the mesh to utilize a unified snapshot of the state of the universe. But we have been working on this over the past few years and hope to have the first iteration in players' hands by next year. 2021? Oh! This will allow us to greatly expand the number of players beyond 50 to thousands concurrently in the same instance, as the tech will spin up additional servers to handle the simulation load in an area as the player count increases. You hear that? More tables, everybody. They want to get more tables. And then I think the rest of this is about the quantum simulation. Let me make sure. Yeah, I don't think they really talk about that anymore on here. So 2020, end of 2020, they were still on board with the iCache idea. They were focusing on iCache. They were saying that server meshing is dependent on iCache. iCache was their next step. Still was a step, just not necessarily as big as they're making it out to be here. We jump forward from here, and actually this is 3 days later. Somebody called out what was said about iCache because they were curious about it. In May, Chad McKinney wrote, "At this point, I think iCache / global persistence tier 1 will land before the end of the year, but I want to specify exact dates. Don't want to specify exact dates." This person's basically asking, what happened? Chad came on to answer, "When I wrote that, that was indeed a reflection of the current predicted schedule for iCache and global persistence. In retrospect, I think I should probably have not said anything even vaguely close to dates, because really that is more part of the coordinated message that goes out with things like the roadmap." To answer your questions on what happened to iCache, there ended up being some discovered work along the way in order to both deliver on the goals of iCache while also setting up for server meshing. Without going into too many details, for example, we have filled out more of the design of iCache to scale better by allowing us to query on data in a way that leverages the shard aggregation of the data. I don't know what that means. Additionally, we've laid out some more ambitious plans to deal with some inventory design work to set us up for planned features like the separation of players and characters, and to support additional design asks for things like physical inventory and cargo. Some resources have been borrowed away from iCache work, and therefore things like long-term persistence implementation and support for some vital internal engine work to support the team. I need music, Jesus. This hasn't been a huge amount, but it did impact the schedule. We increased the amount of internal testing we are planning for the feature set and increased the amount of time dedicated to tooling for debugging so that we have more confidence when it goes live for initial release. In the last video I said the iCache service fleet was largely done and most of the work is focused on integrating into the game engine and updating all the game systems accordingly. That is still true. So it's definitely, this is, I think, where the whole idea of communication starts to break down. Things were going on actively here, right? Like, they acknowledged that some of these things were not exactly what we imagined. We discovered some work along the way and we needed to change some stuff. This is something that we were hearing about in October of 2020, right? I want you to remember that, because as far as I know, this is the last time we were told anything about iCache. I don't think iCache was scrapped for PES. I think it still helped with the physical inventory stuff, because we did see those implementations come in to the game last year in 2021. Like we were just looking at here. These physical and local inventory changes did depend on some of this work. We don't know to what extent, we don't know how much of it was needed versus scrapped, but I do believe that the work that they were talking about when they talked about all this stuff still ended up making a difference in the game. I just don't think it completed everything that they thought it was going to complete. I think they had to go back and make something that was a little more resilient, a little faster, and a little more scalable. So, like I said, this was the last time we heard about it, October of 2020, at least as far as I know. I could be wrong. Now, here, I believe Chris talks a little bit about what's going on with server meshing in the game. This was July 1st of 2021. Now, actually, before we do that, check this out. July, November, December of that year here. Okay, so this, we heard this, right? 2020, and then all radio silence. And then we started to hear about this thing called the Super P cache. Now this is from monthly reports. This was the monthly report of April 2021. It's a while ago, but also pretty long after this, right? October 13th, 2020 to April of 2021 was really silence on this feature. And then they said, for services, work progressed on prepping the Super P cache for the next release. That's it. Just that. Maybe I missed it, but I remember going over these monthly reports and literally just starting to read about a Super P cache and having no clue what that was. And it happened again, July 2021. The team are currently dealing with the final edge cases for the Super P cache for Alpha 3.14. Again, really wasn't sure what this meant. I had assumed this was something different from the iCache, and like maybe it was ahead of the iCache. I didn't really know, but I do think that whatever work was going into iCache was parallel alongside this work for the Super P cache, and that's likely what led to some sort of persistence and physicalized inventory in 2021. That being said, I think this was pretty bad communication on their part, partially because A, we go from iCache to Super P cache over the course of 4 months and we don't know what the heck that means or what's going on, and B, this all gets figured out, spoiler alert, at the end of 2021, and we don't find out until May of 2022. So that's yet another huge gap where we just don't hear what the heck is going on with this stuff. And for most things, that's not a problem. But when you're talking about the feature that's probably the most important feature for the continuation of the game, I think they need to be better about talking about this. I know that it's not fun to maybe tell us that stuff isn't going right, or they're not even sure how things are going themselves, but I think that they should try and share the information in some way. I can sympathize with not wanting to tell people, hey, this solution didn't work, and not have something else to tell them will work, you know? Like, you want to go do some testing, figure out if the new solution will work, and then give all the information. Hey, this didn't work, but we got something else working. That's obviously the best way to do it PR-wise and for the sake of your community's health, but at the same time, it just leaves us confused and guessing, and it kind of sucks. Are we owed this information? I think that depends on who you ask. But in the name of open development and trying to share information, I would certainly love to hear it. Yeah, in the monthly reports, at the very least, I'd like to hear it, because this is really the best way we get information on this stuff. Why is Squadron 42 taking so long? I think Squadron 42 is probably taking so long because there was far too much scrutiny on how perfect it should be. They probably also, I think they messed up in terms of their development priorities. I think they first tried to make both games at the same time and couldn't really focus on the main gameplay aspects like the combat and the health system and the inventory system and stuff like that. But I also think that was slowed down because the engine wasn't there either. Like the engine didn't give you inventory support. It doesn't give you multiple damage types. It doesn't do all this stuff that while they're making Squadron 42, they probably wanted. And at some point they must have realized like, oh crap, we can't do this stuff, but we want it in the game, but we have to finish it in the engine, but the engine's taking a long time. So I think they kind of just got stuck on Squadron 42 for a while. And they're just really, really hammering to try and figure out the gameplay now. Ship combat, FPS combat, inventory systems, interactions, AI interactions, stuff like that. I think they're just hammering on it now to hopefully get that done in time. But I think really just mismanagement of development priorities earlier on probably is what led to Squadron taking so long and wanting to do too much with the first go. You always thought they could use a smiley face system for sharing how well a team thinks things are going. Angry for bad, big smile for good. That doesn't give us very much detail. Super persistent cache, likely something that keeps track of all items and positions of said items, characters, and ships. Yeah, it's essentially the same thing as the entity graph or the iCache, but like they just dropped the term on us. Ask CIG hard questions, they go on meltdown. Think we were calling it entity graph now, they don't call it iCache anymore. Yeah, they don't. It's iCache is something different. So in this screen, iCache is down here. Entity graph is actually, I guess it is. Oh, Mrs. Tomato, did you just gift out 5 subs? Thank you, Mrs. Tomato. You pushed us further towards that goal and got raffles started. Honestly, that's a big give. We just gave money to Twitch to get us closer to the goal. Thanks for gifted out the subs. Yeah, you're right. Entity graph is taking the place of the iCache. And overall, that leads us into persistent entity streaming. Where was I? Seems like they're terrified of Squadron 42 failing, so I could see them going hard to make it real clean. Yeah, if Squadron 42 fails, this project is kind of dead. It won't live up to the hype, but it just needs to be a good game. They just have to prove that they can make a decent game, you know? They communicate more than all other game studios put together. Having a standard PR company would tell us to shut up and call you racist if you ask too many questions. Racist? Yeah, I mean, most companies don't decide to make a game like CIG is because they have to do this. This stuff's hard. Yeah, we had the thread up here about iCache. A lot of gamers simply don't care about the mechanics. I love that your chat does. Yeah, that's why we're here. There's so many people who follow Star Citizen who love learning more about how games are made, and I think it's a really, really good tool for getting deep into that. Smile System shows more of their optimization, doesn't commit them to writing. That's fair. All Squadron 42 needs to be is not Cyberpunk. Yeah, would be happy to have Squadron 42 scrapped entirely. Oh boy. Not gonna lie, I think that would also kill the project. As much money as Star Citizen makes, Squadron 42 is going to make the money that allows them to get it to a live release kind of status, you know? They put enough development into Squadron 42 using Star Citizen as the funding method, and then they finish Squadron and release it, and it brings in tons of money to help fund the rest of Star Citizen. It's kind of it's a weird way of doing it, but I do think that at this point they're tied into both, and if they fail on either one, then the other's really gonna suffer. Yo, JG Wentworth. Thank you for the sub. Resubbing with that Amazon Prime sub. I appreciate it. 6 months now, too. Optimism. Oh, did I say optimization? Something you're unclear on is how the retrieval for the database info. How the retrieval, like how they retrieve the database info? Hey, JG, thank you as well for the 400 bits. My friend, much appreciation. DG360 has a great gameplay and CIG's accounting on financials. I wanted to talk to him about that. With so many pre-sales already, what defines success? For Star Citizen itself, I think long-term, lifetime. Honestly, having a healthy economy is probably going to be a success. If you can take everything that they're planning for in Star Citizen and make it run with a healthy economy, I think you've seen some success. Still a long way from done, yeah. You believe that Squadron is the fastest way to grab a lot of money to fund the rest of Star Citizen? Yeah, I think that's what they're banking on. Looking at the way they've expanded with the studios that they've bought, with the amount of people they're saying they want to hire, there's no way that Star Citizen alone can fund that. At least I don't think there is. Maybe I'm naive, but I really think that they're posturing like they have a big influx of cash coming soon, and I think they expect that to be Squadron. Is he not seeing or reading YouTube? I am. If you drop a box near the snake pit on Clio and go somewhere, log out, and another player comes to where you left the box, does that player find the box you left? Yes. That would be the idea. If you left something out in the wild and you logged out and left it, it's not going anywhere. Because it's no longer linked to your own personal inventory, it's linked to the global inventory for the entire game. DG's not having a good time? Yeah, he couldn't get on the podcast earlier this year because he was very busy. Sounds like it continued to be busy. How does it trigger the request to load that info? Is it the probability volume? No, the actual state of that entity is saved. That's what the entity graph is. There's actually a really good, no, I think I have it on my own, in my own records here. Let's say engine. Nope. Oh, I don't know what it would be saved as. Server meshing? Oh, okay. You know what? It's probably in here. So this thing here is kind of a diagram of what it's supposed to look like. Like you said, you're out here on Clio, right? And you have the moon. The idea is that the moon is linked to the planet, which is linked to the system, which is linked to the overall universe database. And as you save stuff or drop stuff in those moons or on those planets, all of those things are saved in this web. And they all persist and they're all remembered by the entity graph. So even if you left something on a planet, it wouldn't be gone. The game would remember that it's there. Can't figure out YouTube and it's driving him a little crazy. Everyone in the chat, pray for DG. YouTube is very, very, I won't get into it. YouTube is a struggle though. It takes a lot. Thought you may have been reading Discord comments. No, I'm on Twitch and YouTube right now. Bungie spent $500 million in 10 years on Destiny, so it isn't impossible. Do I think we'll see recessions and market crashes? They can definitely trigger economic problems in the verse to create dynamic events and stuff, yeah. I think Starfield will help Star Citizen. I don't think it'll hurt it. New 24, thank you for the Prime sub, my friend. First time. I appreciate you. Get you playing through the radio as I truck around. Stopped real quick because I had a thought. I hear that coffee mug metaphor all the time, but will a coffee persist too? Will the coffee persist too? That is a question for Chris Roberts. Chris, we have one question we can ask you. What happens to the coffee? I honestly don't know. That's a funny question though. You can see a lot on the progress tracker, and many chapters are more or less marked complete other than waiting on the last few passes. That's what it says on there, but you never really know. How does it handle trash collecting and retrieval? To be honest, I think the best realistic way for them to do that is to have NPCs whose job it is to come and pick that stuff up. Janitors, pirates, salvagers, people who would naturally, like, it would be nothing more than the server saying, this thing has been here for too long, clean it up, despawn it. And then the game going, okay, we got to despawn this spaceship that's been crashed. How do we do that? We'll send 2 salvagers in and they'll take care of it in 20 minutes. I think that would be the best way to do it, but we haven't had that confirmed. They've joked a little bit about janitors picking up trash and stuff in cities, which I think is realistic, but who knows if they'll actually go that way. The coffee will persist, but it'll change state from hot to cold. Are they working on coffee degradation? How do you know the name of the song that's playing on stream? I can tell you it. It is called Cozy Snail by Stream Beats. You have a cousin that works for one of the companies. Squadron 42 is pretty much complete. I imagine that the baseline of Squadron 42 is pretty far along and is pretty good. But you have to remember that in terms of completeness in this game, we have to have basically most of the features that we have in the persistent universe are existent in Squadron. Up until this last year, it was pretty much feature parity. There was definitely some things coming into Squadron ahead of us. But if you think about things like damage types, you know, like burning damage versus chemical damage. If you think about things like being able to manually cut through surfaces with a cutting tool, or I don't know, being able to change out components on your ship. Like, these are all things we're still waiting for in the PU, and might not even be in Squadron yet. So first they need to get those features working in Squadron, and then they have to rebalance how they work in Squadron to make sure it's a good experience. So I think if you keep a track of what's going on in the PU, and then consider where might the PU be 1 year ahead of where it is now, I think that's where Squadron is. So I still think we're still a year or two away, to probably more likely 2, definitely 2. But it looks like things are going okay with it. After seeing that diagram, you could code entity graph, entity persistent. Does a persistent entity stream coffee cup spilling in the woods and no one is around to see it make a sound? That's all kinds of a question. Do I think Star Citizen will be dated when it comes out? Nah, absolutely not. I don't think Star Citizen would be dated if it came out in 8 years, which it could. I guess come out is a term too. What I'm really interested in seeing is, because Star Citizen is so open with everything they're doing, when is the next game going to start doing it? Because at some point, other games are going to start to try and take a similar approach through the idea of, you know, higher fidelity and increased choice in gameplay. That's something you see a lot, but not as granular as this. How do I think cargo containers will load on ships from outposts? Right now, I think they'll just appear there. In the future, though, either you or NPCs will have to load it. I don't think we'll see an interior rework on the Reclaimer, no. Newer engines look better in some ways, but there's nothing dated about now so far as graphics and such go. And the thing is, from what I've understood, most of the progress we're going to make in games in the next 10 years is likely going to be in lighting when it comes to graphics. And CIG hasn't even started on their lighting. They're just barely finishing their rendering pass, and then they start to work on things like DLSS, FSR 2.0, ray tracing, global illumination, like all that stuff's coming later. So the game is going to continue to get looking better too. If another game is going to attempt to do this, they are going to have to invest a lot. Or make it smaller scale, you know? Could just be a game that's like this, but it's only on the scale of a city instead of a galaxy. You'd like to see more reward systems implemented. We keep getting punishments and slowdowns, but half the time I can't repair or refuel my ship. Yeah, more rewards for good choices would be nice. Persistent entity streaming is not the name of that pipe that endlessly spews rubbish. Okay, back to where we were because I got distracted. So we heard about the Pcache in the monthly reports and all that stuff. And then we get to July of last year when we got a little update from Chris and Sandy on what's going on with server meshing. Let's hear what they had to say.
This is actually quite a large question, but you can keep it short if that's even possible. Yeah. What's happening with server meshing?
Okay, well, server meshing we're working really hard on. We have put together, probably our biggest engineering strike team. So we have a whole bunch of the engine team that's working on it.
I think it's like a total of 30, around 30 engineers that have been working on this just for years. It's kind of a ridiculous amount of person power to make this work.
As well as the networking team, led by Clive. So on the engineering team, we have Chris Balti leading up server meshing work, and Steve Humphreys is also
Cheers, Shaggy.
A whole bunch to it. And we have a whole back end setup that we're doing here internally, but also some of the back end services and connections are all being engineered partly up in Montreal as well with Turbulent. There's about 20 people, sort of mostly engineers working on server meshing. So it's probably our biggest sort of...
Okay, about 20, not 30, but that doesn't sound right because they also said there were 18 working on persistent entity streaming. Oh, actually, no, that's right. So it's probably a little over 20 of people. Sorry, not 30.
Overall technical initiative. It's super critical. I mean, we've talked about it before. It's sort of it's the bit of tech that will allow us to sort of open up,
He wears two watches. He wears a fitness tracker on his left hand and a watch on his right hand. I don't know what hand is his hand though. How much money has Star Citizen cost so far in development? I don't know. I would assume 420 to 450 million. They're pretty much dollar for dollar earnings and spendings every year, and they release their financial papers at the end of the year if you'd like to see those, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Players, but also just sort of help a lot with, sort of our performance issues that we have, because when we, you play right now in the game, you play in the live build and you're running around Stanton. If everybody's in one location, it's a lot better than if people are spread all over the system. And typically what happens is as a server stays up for a longer amount of time, people spread out. You'll have people in Area 18 and ArcCorp. You'll have people in New Babbage and Microtech. You'll have people in Lorville. You have people flying around in space. You have people at space stations. And so the longer the servers get out, the more you got different actors and different entities that are all sort of come in around the star system. And as we build out the star system, more and more entities and objects get created. So we're going to have Arasan coming out with 3.14, and that's...
Sound like he said we're going to have our ass come out in 3.14.
Hundreds of thousands of new objects and entities that just come in with that. So if someone goes there, now all of a sudden that's hundreds of thousands of more entities and objects that the server has to simulate. So the key with server meshing is this is allowing multiple servers to handle different areas inside a star system, and even later stages of it, multiple servers working together to handle even one area, like an Arasan or a New Babbage or something like that, and allowing players to seamlessly sort of travel around and be passed under the control of different servers. So the authority passes from one server to another server as one goes, and that allows us to have much larger amount of players in the same space and instance. It's also incredibly critical for transitioning to new star systems. So if you go for a jump point and you go to Pyro, for instance, we need to transfer you from the server that was handling you in the Stanton system to the server that will handle you as you enter into Pyro. And so we've already got a lot of the core features of server meshing because we've been working on for quite a long time. So the authority transfer, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's already been built, and we're building out the back end database, what we call the entity graph, that is going to sort of persist and remember.
So that might be the first time they mentioned the entity graph. I actually don't think I didn't realize he said it here. Hold on one second. Let me just double check. Star Citizen 2021 entity graph. That's gonna just show us a bunch of CitizenCon stuff. I don't think I remember him ever. Ah, here we go. April. What is this? Entity graph seeding. So it was in the progress tracker. But I don't remember ever really hearing much about the entity graph before that. Latest roadmap, server meshing. This is how I find all this stuff. I just search and then find the Reddit thread where it's coming from. Entity graph is a database which has seeding parameter that stores all entity states in their factory form. Okay, so we started to hear about the entity graph early last year. Definitely before I think they started mentioning it to us publicly though. It's not exactly $1 to $1. They usually are like positive a couple million, but they're really close. It's like they don't make a lot of money from this. As a company at least, and obviously the employees are making money. Yeah, I think they finally made their profit in 2021. Oh, was it 2020? I know 2021 for sure they finally were making some form of profit. The art is done and there it is and there, but it probably needs special handling for its projectiles. Ever since you went on an MMORPG, they have become more critical of Star Citizen and pretty much spread it to massively overpowered. Oh, massively OP. Yeah, they do some stuff. Although I was just looking through some records here and I came across this screenshot, which I completely forgot, where Massively OP actually linked one of my videos in their article. I don't even remember this happening. But I was like, hey, thanks OP. You guys are usually pretty angry about this game. Are the giveaway codes unique, only redeemable by one person? No, anybody can redeem them. If you've got the codes, just put them in and they should be good to go. Comparing SC to GTA. Ooh. This is the third stream you've watched and you asked me if it has been weird to watch. Wait. And I asked you if it had been weird to watch on a recorded video. I think you got cut off there. Hey, Hourglass. If you were out in the woods and you dump 1,000 mugs and no one interacts with them for 4 days, would they still be there? I doubt it. That'd probably be too much density of items, you know? They're also ramping up, so their current costs are clearly under the money they are bringing in. Yeah, and it looks like they're expecting a lot more money soon. It wasn't weird to watch the recording. Okay, cool. Good to know. Okay, so they were talking about entity graph at this point, and this thread is all the way from, was that April? So it was definitely Q1 of 2021 at the absolute latest that they already knew that they were switching to the entity graph. Sometime between Q4 of 2020 and the end of Q1 of 2021, they made that switch. And then they slowly started to introduce us to it until late in the year when they finally told us everything about it. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that very shortly. But let's listen to what else Chris had to say about the entity graph.
And database, what we call the entity graph, that is going to sort of persist and remember the state of every single entity and object in the world. So if you stream out an area, you completely remember the state where everything is, you know, whether you dropped a Coke can in the middle of a forest on a planet, and that
You're offended, nobody noticed my haircut. It's okay. It's okay. You know, you don't notice this flossiness. I don't know what that means. What's my favorite tomato? I like a caprese salad, but I'm allergic to tomatoes.
Whether you dropped a Coke can in the middle of a forest on a planet, and that aspect of it, you know, opens up obviously the persistence we talked about, which is great, but is also a fundamental building block for the server meshing. So we've been really working hard on that. We've, you know,
That's such a blessing. Thank you so much. Like, I don't know what to be more excited for, the song or the subs. Thank you, Santux, for the Prime sub and for gifting out those 5 subs to the community. and got us past our goal. Okay, while we're doing this, I will pull up the next giveaway code and get it to you on the screen.
It's technically challenging thing. I will say probably by the end of this year, we should hopefully have the proper persistence in there that talked about the proper global persistence, which is this sort of streaming entity graph thing that I've just discussed, which is, the new version of what was being called the iCache before, if people are getting confused about that. But yeah, no, we're working really hard on it. We're going to have, this year we're not doing a physical citizen.
All right, there is the code. That is the third of 10 secret giveaway codes for the 400i. If you haven't already put any of them in, make sure to hit it up. ! Giveaway will make it pop up. Please don't spam it though. The bot's gonna freak out. One person do it, and then I will post it back into the channel for all of you. But that, my friends, is what you get for passing the goals. Thank you, Santux, for pushing us past that.
Entity graph thing that I've just...
Okay, so here it actually sounds like he talks about the difference between iCache and entity graph.
It's by far the most technically challenging thing. I will say probably by the end of this year, we should hopefully have the proper persistence in there that talked about the proper...
Yeah, it's Careless Whisper.
Which is this sort of streaming entity graph thing that I've just discussed, which is, the new version of what was being called the iCache before, if people are getting confused about that. But yeah, no, we're working really hard on it. We're going to have, this year we're not doing a physical CitizenCon because it just felt a bit too early coming back from the pandemic, whether everyone could travel or not travel. I mean, even now it's, we're going to go to the UK next month and, we're all vaccinated, but still it's going to be a pain. And
all right, I just posted the link in there. Again, that's a 400i giveaway. Make sure to check it out if you haven't already. It's ending right after the stream is over.
We got a quarantine.
The code is on the screen. Right here.
And do all this other stuff. So, we'll probably do a physical CitizenCon the following year, but this year we're going to do a virtual one, which we didn't do last year just because, we're just sort of overwhelmed with everyone moving to work from home and everything. But this year we will do one, and one of the panels is going to be on server meshing, which will drill down much more onto the sort of details. The technical setup and details. But I'm actually quite looking forward to virtual CitizenCon, and I think everyone making the game loves to share what they're working on with everyone. So it's actually quite a morale boost for the teams. And it's nice when you do it in person because you get to meet people in person, and you can see that, how much people really love and enjoy the work that everyone's working on. But the next best thing is to do a virtual one, so that will be later this year in October. I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully you guys will like it.
Yeah. What else are you looking forward to in Star Citizen?
Did we like it? Did y'all enjoy it last year? I thought it was pretty. I mean, in terms of information, I thought it was great. Obviously, it wasn't like awesome that it wasn't in person or anything, but it was really cool. It was very cool doing the some of the info we got to see, which is actually some info that we're going to look at right now. Let me just make sure I'm going in the right order here. We got both of these open. So here, first, we're going to get told Yogi, I think it is. I want to say this is Yogi. We're going to hear a little bit about what this entity graph is, why it matters, and then we'll jump forward and hear a little more about server meshing and how persistent entity streaming fits into that server meshing.
Technology will work. Let's have a brief look at. Before we look into persistent streaming and server meshing and how this new technology will work, let's have a brief look at entity streaming and how our solar system is set up. Each solar system...
Yeah, there's no keynote this year. There's not a physical CitizenCon this year, but they will be doing something digital like last year, just with no keynote.
Can be seen as one giant level containing every single object inside the solar system. From the sun to the Ventura rock, stand as one large map. Since this is a lot of data, the setup is split up into a hierarchy of nested object containers, which can be streamed in and out individually. If you look at an abstract view of Stanton, it all starts with one solar system root object container. This object container contains the sun, the planets, and the moons around each planet. Each of those locations then has its own object container, and if you take a closer look at a moon, you will find the entities placed around the moon inside this object container. For example, a space station orbiting the moon. This setup keeps repeating. The space station could be set up via multiple rooms, each defined by its own object container. Additionally to the static hierarchy of object containers, there are also all the dynamic entities which bring the universe to life, NPCs, an interactive vending machine, and of course players and spaceships. Most of these entities are made of a hierarchy as well. For example, a player has his body, an undersuit, and armor attached to it, and they are all child entities of the player. The streaming system treats these mini hierarchies as streaming groups to make sure that an object like a spaceship is always streamed in as one unit. Loading the entirety of Stanton into memory and simulating every single entity would be very expensive, especially on the client, but also on a single server.
Okay, so this actually, this is kind of going back to, remember I was saying that in order for things to be saved, you have to store them? This kind of leads to that. So like if you left an upper armor out and it wasn't stored into something else, it wasn't stowed away into the inventory that's saved on the entity graph, it wouldn't persist between shards. Kind of getting back into this conversation again. I promise it goes full circle. So that was talking about the actual server meshing. And this gets a little bit more into the streaming.
Which allows us to stream object containers and streaming groups individually.
How is this happening? I just turned off notifications. Why are they still happening? Can you relax over there? I will mute you. Can I mute you? Very annoying.
Starts, all entities and object containers within the solar system are loaded into local memory of that game server. These entities are not streamed in, we just store the initial state in server memory. When a player connects, we create a so-called streaming bubble around that player, and object containers as well as streaming groups that are visible from the player's point of view are considered inside this bubble. Any object container that is...
So this might be getting a little bit out of the realm of persistent entity streaming. The thing to remember is that persistent entity streaming is ultimately a tool to complete server meshing. The whole conversation revolves around these two, or this whole box here called server meshing. This is what makes Star Citizen Star Citizen. If this doesn't happen, this game will likely not really make it that far. Persistent entity streaming is literally just the connecting piece that makes those things possible. So when we're talking about persistent entity streaming, server meshing is going to come up a lot. And what they're describing here in this video is how, as a player, you will prompt a server to load in certain things based on your location. That won't really matter when it comes to persistent entity streaming, but what you're seeing is a bubble, an area around that player that will stream in those things. So like you said earlier, if you leave a box on Clio and it persists there even if you log out, if there's no players near there, it won't actually exist in that area. It won't physically be there. But once a player, once this green player here, once their little bubble goes within the range of that box, then it will be there because the game remembers that it's supposed to be there. It'll be streamed in.
Client. Entities are considered inside the streaming bubble if their projected screen size on a virtual 1080p plane is larger than 5 pixels based on distance to the player. So while a large object like a moon will be considered inside the bubble from far away, a small object like a ship will only be considered inside when it's much...
All right, Tyler, I don't know why it would be doing that. I just fixed that problem earlier, but I'll try to fix it and let you know.
Closer to the player. When the player starts moving across the universe, entities that leave the streaming bubble will become unbound, and the replication layer will remove these entities from the client. Entities that enter the streaming bubble will get bound to the client, which caused the network layer to replicate these entities to the client, effectively streaming them in. We call this technique entity bind culling because streaming on the client is driven by the network layer, binding and unbinding entities. If entities are not in any client streaming bubble, so no players in their vicinity, these entities are also streamed.
Is anybody else not able to put in the codes? Is that not working for anyone else? I had it reported that it was working. I don't know why it wouldn't be working for somebody now.
Out on the server. They go back into a dormant state where they are not simulated. This model works quite well on the client. However, it doesn't scale well on the server.
Working for you?
Well, we
Added
do
multiple entries? Okay. I don't know where we are. PES is the grounds for the future systems, not to mention necessary for the universe to actually be a PU. Yeah.
Well on the client.
Okay. Let's jump forward from here. And I'm going to show you kind of the actual replacement of persistent entity streaming. Is it? Okay, here we go. So this is where our little grilled cheese platter comes in. Oh man, I'm gonna start using paint for more of these.
Since we now mesh multiple server instances together to simulate a shared state of the universe, we no longer call this instance, but instead we call it shard. A shard is still a unique version of the universe, and we still have multiple shards running in parallel. However, the server mesh will lift our current hard limit of 50 players, and it will enable us to steadily increase the number of players we can support within one shard.
More people at the table.
It will take some time, and in our first version of server meshing, we will still have a very similar situation.
There's more people in the shards.
There's quite a few shards running in parallel. However, this technology is going to enable us to start scaling the universe to become a true MMO experience. There are some fundamental differences between a shard.
But imagine this. Imagine we have this grilled cheese platter, right? Everybody remembers every red box is a shard. Every orange color is part of the entity graph. Blue are the servers, and the overall thing is the PU, right? Imagine if you had all of this, but you didn't have this orange conveyor belt taking the items from everywhere to everywhere else. Imagine if you didn't have this highway that goes to servers and nodes and all that stuff, and it wasn't actually saved. Every shard would be locked to its own database. If you jumped to your friend playing in Europe and you happen to be in a different shard, then suddenly you don't have access to the same stuff, which is kind of destroys the idea of this being all one living universe, like they like to say.
To become a true MMO experience. There are some fundamental differences between a shard and an instance. And for this, we need to take a closer look at the replication layer and talk a little bit about persistent streaming. Previously, the entity state was held entirely in memory on the dedicated game server. And besides some selected persistent player items, all that state would be lost when the servers shut down or crashed. The replication layer is fundamentally different, as the entire state of the universe is stored within a graph database. We call this entity graph, and it's an evolution of the original iCache. When we create a new shard, the initial entity state of the universe is seeded into this database. This happens offline before we let player join the shard.
So they confirmed that has happened in May, back in the chairman's letter. They confirmed that the whole seeding thing of the entity graph worked.
When the shard comes online, the replication mesh caches the state from the entity graph. As players connect to the shard and as we start to spin up new server nodes, simulation begins and alters the state of the universe. The replication layer does not only replicate these state changes to connect players and server nodes, it also replicates the state into the entity graph. Since the entity graph is a persistent database, the state of the shard is never lost, and even if the shard is shut down, the state persists and can be resumed at a later time. Benoit is going to show you some more technical details about the entity graph.
Thank you, Paul. Get ready for a deep dive into the entity graph persistence database. The entity graph is our approach to persisting the game world. This is fundamentally different to what is happening today in the game, where only items you own are actually stored. Our objective is to be able to save the state of the replication layer, which includes all entities in a given universe shard, in order to provide a truly persistent world, where actions you take as a player can influence environments in the game world permanently. The entity graph, as the name implies, stores game data as a graph. This representation is native for the game engine because it is how internally those data structures the game uses are addressed and manipulated. Using a graph...
Okay, let me skip forward to where they talk about this. Here we go. This is basically just continuing to reiterate the idea of the entity graph and these things being saved in some kind of a persistent state like this.
This is also how replicants hold the entities in memory for each of their assigned territories. For example, A ship is made up of several entities that make up different parts of the entire playable vehicle. Each part is parented to another entity until the root of the ship is reached. Each of these entity nodes holds properties with regard to what the entity represents in the game. The class of
Oh, Arjun, thank you so much. Arjun, thank you for the sub, tier 1. Appreciate you.
object it is, the item type, its legal owner, orientation, and of course its very precise physical location within the game world. Each edge in our graph qualifies the relationship to the parent. In the case of a vehicle, our edges store properties that tell the system which port is being used to attach the entity into the parent and what kind of attachment it is. An item port attachment, a zone attachment, many others. In a constellation, for example, the different major sections of the hull are entity nodes with edges to the ship.
This is like, this kind of is really good at showing how ridiculous this game is. Look at this.
Parented to another entity until
Look at this
root
graph.
of the ship is reached. Each of
This is a constellation. That's
these
it.
entity nodes
Look at all of these freaking objects and entities. That is a single ship. So imagining something like this for every single ship in a server, right? In an instance, and then imagining that all those things can be disconnected, reconnected, repaired, damaged, removed. That's the same as disconnected, idiot. Change the color of it. All of these things are super variable, manipulatable. I don't know. All of them can be changed a lot. So like this is a lot of stuff to track. And what they originally discovered with the iCache system is it just could not keep up, I guess.
holds properties with regard to what
Mutable?
the entity represents in the game. The
That's a good
class
one.
of object it is, the item type, its legal owner, orientation.
You enter the code by going to go to the page where the code is, where the giveaway is, and then on the very bottom it'll say enter a code. That's what you use. Blow upable.
And of course its very precise physical location within the game world. Each edge in our graph qualifies the relationship to the parent. In the case of a vehicle, our edges store properties
Ooh,
that tell the
modular.
system which port is
I
being
like
used
that.
to attach
Starstreams, how you doing?
the entity into the parent and what kind of attachment it is. An item port attachment, a zone attachment, many others. In a constellation, for example, the different major sections of the hull are entity nodes with edges to the ship root. We call this small graph of item an aggregate because it is a whole movable unit. The ship root in this case is called the aggregate root because it sits at the top of a logical object. You can think of what you normally call an item as an aggregate, with the aggregate root being the actual item you are talking about. For example, a first-person weapon with attached scope, mag clips, and laser sights is a small hierarchy of entities. We
Yeah,
distinguish
this will help with server lag a ton. This is like one of the biggest things that will help to reduce the amount of load on each server.
the aggregate roots from other nodes by giving it a label. Labels allow
Not persistent entity streaming, server meshing. Persistent entity streaming is coming this year. That's not probably going to do that much for the server lag. But the server meshing that comes as a result of it next year should.
us to distinguish and rapidly look up and find nodes of a specific type, either when we retrieve parts of the graph or when we look up specific nodes. Those labels exist to allow correct reversal of the graph data when we query for specific things in the game world. Other labels include streaming groups, universe root, star system root. This allows us to really look up and index those types. But the tree depth doesn't stop there. Additional information is required for a fully functional ship. The insides of each of those structural entities have to be fleshed out. Object containers are the building blocks of how space division is achieved, which aggregates and what part of the hierarchy they're in. In fact, most major areas of ships are represented as OC entities attached to ship root or another OC. The shape of this data actually takes in reality is driven by designers. Of course, then, each of those object containers also contain entity hierarchies as well, expanding to have the common static and dynamic entities you're used to playing with, like elevators, beds, guns, seats, gimbals, and others. In addition to object containers that make up the structure of the ship, Other aggregates can also be attached within the hierarchy of our ship. For example, a rover parked in the cargo bay of our colony will be attached as a sub-aggregate attached to your ship's cargo grid.
That was one of the examples they used for the whole stowing and unstowing thing. If you put a rover into a ship and then you stored that ship, the rover would be saved. But if you didn't have the rover in the ship, if it was just lying next to the ship but you stored the ship, the rover wouldn't be brought to another shard. Again, because it wasn't stored into a global database area like the ship was. You store the ship in a space station or in a hangar or something, the game knows it's stored and can transfer it to another shard. That rover would be left behind, though.
Same goes for turrets, which are changeable and themselves expose item ports, allowing guns to be mounted. For each of those entity nodes, a snapshot document is also stored. This document contains all the runtime values, the game components attached to those entities. This data is the dynamic part of the model where game developers can persist variables on any entity in the game world according to the rules of a game component. For example, damage state and health data are stored within the snapshot document of those ship entities. Storing and retrieving data in graph form really have some awesome properties. It's a native structure to the game engine, so it gets loaded rapidly. It's very simple and effective to serialize and transport because it's just a list of nodes and edges. There are optimized databases that we can use that allow us to fetch entities recursively in a traversal rapidly, and the data set can be sharded across multiple database instances reliably. One key...
That's not true. That's part of the hero item stow and unstow. As long as there are no players around, your ship and vehicle would be stowed. Right, it'd be stowed, but it wouldn't be transferred between shards. That's the way that I was understanding it. Are you saying that... Where did I get that? Where did I even see that? That was something from... something I was reading today. I'm not going to be able to find that. I honestly can't remember where I saw that. It was earlier today. But the idea that you need to stow an item for it to be able to transfer from one shard to another. Right, because the idea was if items didn't need to be stowed to transfer between shards, that would mean that items would constantly be popping up in different shards with no explanation. So like, it's in the Q&A. Let's see that. What is that, the server meshing Q&A? Because that wouldn't make sense. If you dropped a box from your ship in one shard, in the other shard, since your ship isn't there because you can't get attacked in separate shards, that box would just appear out of thin air, right? When an entity is unstowed in a shard, it physically exists in the shard. It exists permanently within that shard. Yeah, this is what I was saying. If you have something unstowed inside of a shard, it only exists in that shard until it's stowed into an actual inventory. This can be done by picking up a gun and placing it in your backpack, or by landing a ship on a landing pad, which will stow the ship into a specific landing pad inventory. Once an entity is within an inventory, it's stored in the global database and can be unstowed into any shard. We also plan for a mechanic called Hero Item Stow and Unstow. This will take any player-owned hero items and automatically stow them into a player-specific shard transition inventory. The automatic stow usually happens when no other players are around and the entity is streamed out. Items in this shard transition inventory will follow a player automatically, so when a player logs into a different shard, we will take entities and unstow them back into the new shard at the position where the player was left. So then this depends on certain types of items, is what they're saying. What do they mean by player-owned hero items? Does that mean like mission items, or is it like if I dropped a med pen, would that count? Will your character and ship always be in game when you have left? If you logged out from your ship bed on a planet, will the ship still be there? Yeah. You've never once seen a CIG implement a feature that was working. Hey, Aaron, you want to come on my podcast? You got a lot to say about this game, mate. Just found out about the 400i giveaway. Been flying it for this patch, and it's a pretty solid ship. Here's a sub. Thank you, Verbosity. Probably mission items. Yeah. I don't know what a hero item exactly is. Subscriber items? Oh, that would make sense if it was like stuff that you own, that you should already have access to at any point. Rare items or mission items with a special slot. If you drop a ship in the middle of space for someone to come and pick up, it won't be there if not landed on a pad. Not in another shard. It'll be there in your shard. Good evening, Crouch. How's you doing? Think how inventory currently works. It transfers between servers. That's also part of server meshing. Your ship and armor would persist through different servers as well. Ray's Guide has a good series of videos on this. They haven't really defined past that yet. Ships and vehicles being the key ones. When you land your ship on a moon and log out, the ship will stream out and automatically be stored if no other players are around at that moment. Now, when you log into a different shard, your ship will be unstowed into the new shard. Okay, so ships it will work for. That's good. That's really good. That's cool. Like, that'd be great if you could just go to another shard and still have your ship there. Verbosity, thanks for that Prime sub. Much appreciation. All of the appreciations. Caveat there. Hey, Discordia, how you doing? It's been a little while. There have to be no other players around, right? Have all your multi-crew people go to sleep first. Wonder how they will manage streaming in two ships if they are parked on a planet in the same spot. Not an issue that will happen often, but could around popular busy outposts. That's fair. I don't know, Cantor. I just saw a message about CIG not releasing features or something and noticed it was the same name. Okay. So I think we finished really on this
The
part.
replication layer does not only replicate these state changes to connect players and server nodes, it also replicates the state into the entity graph. Since the entity graph is a persistent database, the state of the shard is never lost, and even if the shard is shut down, the state persists and can be resumed at a later time. Benoit's
You think it means that player-owned items will be streamed stowed to the global inventory entity graph? I wonder if there's a time limit. Like if you sign out with your ship, how long until it goes away? Is it a couple minutes? Is it immediate? Is it 20 seconds? I'm doing well, Discordia. Thank you for asking. What you got from the videos on PES is... Oh, that's what you got from the videos on PES. CIG just dropped a video. Did they really? Yo, these birds are wild. You guys hear that? These birds are going crazy out there. Ah, ship showdown stuff. Okay, let's see what let's see what they're saying for the ship showdown. Wait. I don't know if I'm going to get a copyright for this. Here's to hoping. Yay, Ship Showdown. Okay, so that's the ad for it. I believe it's starting later today, and they'll probably release the different ships that are going to be in there. I think they might have actually teased it there. I don't know if that was supposed to be them specifically telling us what was going to be here, or if they were just... Whoops. Or, because I think this was this last year? No, this would be this year. So these must be the ships then, yeah? Was that Star Citizen music? I hope so. So we've got a Cutlass Arrow Mule. The Mule. There's no PTV though. I know people were really hoping for that. Oh, you can get a copyright strike. It doesn't matter if it's publicly available. If somebody else owns it, they can strike your account. Well, they can give you a warning for it. But luckily, Star Citizen is kind about that. They let us use their stuff as much as we want, for now. What happens if you set your ship on a course and log out? When you log back in, will it still be on the same course? If your unmanned ship traverses an area with another player, will they see it? They talked a little bit about this when it came to the Death of a Spaceman stuff, and how like your ship would stop moving and it would automatically try to go back to the last place that you landed at and stuff like that. I'm not sure how they're going to do that though. No PTV, yeah. If the 400i beats out the Constellation, you'll be the happiest civ in the verse. That's a good battle. That's going to be a good first fight. You vote for the Mule. It's the most deadliest vehicle in the game. Ships aren't decided yet. There is 13 days to upload and vote first. I thought they released the official ship list, and then they just like do each battle over the course of several days. No? Hey, Croncy with the raid. What's up, my man? How are you doing, buddy? How was your stream? Were you doing some Star Citizen? Were you crashing, fighting, flying, dying? Let me give you that shout out, dude. Throwing down in Star Citizen, I see you. How was it? Over here, we're going over persistent entity streaming. We are talking about server meshing and the what it's going to bring to the game in 3.18 and then beyond in 4.0. Soul Scream, thank you so much for gifting that sub out to Croncy, by the way. The old Cronce. Being forklift certified has its many advantages. You think carts are more deadly than mules? Yeah, those trolleys will mess you up. They'll knock you out. Doing some gun running and did your first little conversation type thing. It was interesting. Might have to become a future SC podcast. It's fun to just chill and chat. There's a lot to talk about with Star Citizen. Now it seems more like if you log out your ship and character just stream out, the whole finding home base thing seems a little overcomplicated. True, but will that allow for people to abuse the whole logging out thing too much? Shh, don't say rigged. They let the community entries impact the initial top 16. Okay. So for now, for the next 2 weeks, everybody's just voting. No, there's not going to be any actual battles going on yet. Let's see if they have more here to say about persistent entity streaming, because I believe... Just jump back in here-ish.
Right, linking all objects to the aggregate root. This is a really index call because that's equal on any Stow and Unstowed. One important change in addition that comes about with the entity graph is also how mutations are applied to the database.
Make content.
Each mutation is composed of multiple commands which are executed in sequence but committed transactionally to the database. They either succeed together or fail and roll back together. This ensures that the changes to the graph are always consistent and no lost writes or errors can cause data corruption. For example, a mutation consisting of detach, transfer, and then attach commands would succeed only if all three commands are applied successfully. The system retrieves a constant or
Super Mac! Yo, we got a Mac attack. Please tell me you're still here, Mac. Tell me you didn't leave first. Bruh. I'm trying to get you on the podcast, man. It's been, it's I know you've been busy these last few months with the new one. So I've been trying to, you know, slip in the little hints here and there. And I'm pretty sure he left. But I've been trying to grab him to talk to him. Dude's gone with the wind. I feel it. You're done streaming. You're trying to relax. I get that. Well, we'll talk another time. Badly screwed up where it was uncontrollable when flying because of your thrusters being dead. Oh, because the mule took out an 890 jump.
applied successfully. The system retrieves a constant ordered streams of mutation from the replicant scribes that are part of the replication layer and are enqueued in durable queues to ensure that no message is lost even if the service is unavailable or paused. It's important to understand that the graph does not only cover your ships and items, but the entire game world is made of this way. Your ship is actually attached to the zone host location you travel in. Your playing character is attached to your ship seat when you are piloting it, just like planets are attached to their star system routes.
Seeding. It's a weird term. Would you guys like to learn about this? This isn't really that. I mean, I guess it's all linked to persistent entity streaming. But actually, before we go forward, let's talk about what it's actually going to do for like 3.18, right? Because it's on the roadmap. That's the whole reason we're covering it. It is this last thing here, Core Tech 3.18. And it reads, implementation of the persistent entity streaming core technology into Star Citizen, making use of services such as the entity graph and replication layer. This will allow every dynamic object in the game to fully persist across all servers, irrelevant of whether it is owned or held by a player. So, pretty straightforward. This is the full package. Like, this isn't a tier 0, this isn't a some now, some in the next patch. The way that they are presenting this, after 3.18, everything in the game will exist all the time, which is crazy in my opinion. But that's what they are proposing for 3.18. Let's look and see what they have on the progress tracker. Let's see, persistent streaming and server meshing. So this is a huge task. 19 teams, 118 weeks of work done. Just a ton of people working on this segment of the game. And as you can see, it doesn't end here with this quarter because server meshing is still part of it. So server meshing continues to go well into 2023. And you can tell this is just taking a long time. This takes a lot of work, a lot of people, and a lot of effort. And when people are asking, what's going to make this game actually enjoyable? What's it going to make it work? How do we get rid of all these glitches? I think this is the start of it. I don't think it'll happen with server meshing, but I think after server meshing, they're able to open their eyes to a lot more of the problems that are constantly ongoing and start hammering away at them a little bit. A little bit of hammering. Light hammering. Wonder how they will deal with trash. We were saying earlier, I think it's realistic for them to have characters and NPCs that will clean that stuff up for you or for the city. Does this implementation of PES also include full server meshing into the location nesting? Will that mean we will all see instance merged into a single shard? No, so like I was saying, that comes well after this. Persistent entity streaming will be right around here, but as the task shows, server meshing has plenty more time to go. It's important to consider the other deliverables on the progress tracker besides just the actual persistent streaming and server meshing. Yeah, those things will add a lot of time. As far as we go here, those things are all finished. So like the item shard transition, server streaming, shard replication, that kind of stuff has finished beforehand, with the last thing being server streaming. This is back in the Q1 of this year. So mainly in terms of this, the final thing there is the server meshing, but we can also look on, is this game services or, yeah. I think that might have been, no, it wouldn't be tech animation. Bug fixing, dynamic events, quantum. Yeah, I think that's the only thing that's really pertinent anymore. Star Words. Pez and S and server meshing have tech pieces that are on the progress tracker. I see. Yeah, so there definitely is still stuff to go. What we're going to get with persistent entity streaming won't be bringing along server meshing or anything like that. There's still plenty more. Yeah, cleaning up cluttered areas while they're off screen and coming up with some lore-based reason for that, I think is pretty simple. Salvagers, janitors, park rangers. Do we know if they're running servers on AWS currently? They are. Yeah, that's what they use for their service. Hey, Crucian, how you doing? Thanks for dropping by, my friend. Let me throw you a shout out as well. What are you up to? You doing any what is it called? It's not broadcasting. It's like announcing for stuff with that beautiful voice of yours. Any esports stuff going on? You think trash should be handled by players? There's what we do for our criminals. Don't put them in prison. Just make them go clean up trash everywhere. Some good old fashioned neighborhood, I don't know, whatever it's called. Has anyone commented on Tomato's voice? He should be narrating all my audibles. I appreciate it. Honestly, speaking of which, if anybody hasn't already, Crouch was in chat just now. I don't know if he left. Check out his YouTube channel, though. He's got some great lore readings on there. I love it. He did some reading of The Gift from Baba, which is a pretty good story. Okay, let's get back to this now, because we kind of touched on persistent entity streaming in 3.18. And in the meantime, I'm going to see if I can find there's another video recently where it was discussed while we're listening to this.
The game world, though, must exist in persistence before it can be replicated and mutated. This is part of a process called seeding, where a new database is created by the replication layer. It is during that process that millions of entities are initially created in a sort of a big bang. At this stage, every object container, every minor or major entity from planets to doorknobs are inserted into the entity graph in their default state. That is, the state that the designers decided was the initial state of the world. This process goes down from the universe root to the star system root, and into the different areas and planets, into their landing zone, their buildings, their rooms, down to the smallest possible entity. There are multiple types of entities that are created during this process. First are unstreamable entities, which make up the skeleton of the universe. Those are entities you do not get to see, but are part of and always present on every worker node in the mesh. It is by looking up unstreamable entities that the game world is able to stream in the other types of entities into your client and into the server mesh. It is from those entities that others' entities bloom. Static entities make up the game world that you cannot interact with. Most map objects that make up buildings like the Hurston Tower, rooms and walls of hospitals, or the bar at G-Lock are all made up of static entities. And the last type is dynamic entities. These are entities that you as a player can manipulate. A bottle on a bar, a door in a level, a ship component, everything you interact with when you're playing the game. Of course, during seeding, all object containers are also seeded as part of this hierarchy and inform the shape of the loadable subgraphs. The seeding process takes a couple minutes to complete. Once created, this newly seeded database represents a full dimension of the universe and will now persist as it is modified by players. As you play the game and go about with your ship, your playing character entity moves from location to location, getting attached to new zones as you travel. Your player aggregate is itself part of the Django graph, and your location and state are persisted by the replication layer scribes to the entity graph of your given territory. When you interact with dynamic objects and their properties change, the state of that entity will not persist until this instance of the database is undeployed.
So, I mean, everybody knows. So this is the okay. This is the I was gonna go back to this example, our grilled cheese platter. Give me 1 second, guys. I need to go check on something real quick. Sorry.
Are in fact multiple copies of the universe that are seeded at a given time. We call those shards. Each shard is a unique copy of the game world, complete with all of its entities and unique states. Think of it as an alternate universe. Dynamic entities that have been modified in each dimension will have different states. The bottle on the bar was moved, or the door was destroyed, might not be in the same state between shards. This technique is a way to gain scalability as our player base grows. A single shard can grow to host multiple millions of entities. Even if each shard database is itself clustered and can grow substantially past a single machine, there is a point where multiple clusters are needed. As you join the persistent universe, the matchmaking system is getting retooled in order to select the correct universe shard for you to play on, using multiple data points like your friend's location, your active party, your last game session, or which shards still have items on it that you own. This is to ensure as much as possible that you end up on the same shard you expect to be as a player. In order to provide a seamless game experience, it would be terrible if you lost items you used when you were in a given shard versus another, or if your character was bound to a shard forever. To alleviate this, the system includes the concept of stowed and unstowed entities. An item is considered unstowed when it is currently active in a shard database and being actively simulated on by the worker nodes of the replication layer. Stowed entities are player-owned entities that are stowed in inventory containers or location inventories. Those entities live in another database entirely, called the global
Alrighty,
database.
folks. As much fun as this has been, I did want to continue to go over this stuff a little bit more and get more into it, but we've got a little bit of a thing going on. We've got a puppy emergency that needs to be handled. So I'm going to pass you. Sorry for the abrupt ending. I really am, guys. Little unexpected. But I need to pass you all on to another streamer. I'm going to send you over to Meyer, all of you over on Twitch. Looks like he's also doing some chatting and looking into some stuff. Yeah, we could do some part 2 stuff later. Talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday. Folks, the giveaway is still going on. We did pass our goal today, so that giveaway code is there right underneath my camera if you want to go enter it on the screen for the giveaway. It is there, and I'll leave it on there for the next couple of seconds, but I've got to get going, folks. Sorry about this. I hope this helped. I hope people got a little bit better understanding of persistent entity streaming. I know I'm not the best source for this. I don't know it by heart, but I know where we can find some of the information. So I tried to get that together so that we could all watch it together and learn together. I hope it worked out for you. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was entertaining. And I'll see y'all on Wednesday for another chat and stream. Wednesday Q&A, baby. Have a good one, folks. Enjoy your week. Goodbye.